My name is Shikha Pathak. I'm the Manager Awareness and Skill Building at SciSec. Welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is a part of SciSec series titled Samgacchadhwam. May we all progress together. The objective is to cover various cybersecurity topics and to provide conceptual overviews. Let us start with some ground rules. All attendees of the webinar will be on mute by default. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. In case you have any questions, please share them on the chat window and the speakers will respond after the presentation. We will be recording this webinar and the recording will be uploaded on SciSec's YouTube channel. So you can revisit it anytime later. This is a two-part webinar. Post this session, there will be an MCQ-based assessment. Next week, that is on 9th December, we will be scheduling a hands-on session. The topic today is Zero Trust Decoded. We are sure you will find this series of webinar very useful. We are hopeful that these webinars will kindle your interest in the field of security. I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. The topic today is Zero Trust Decoded. Here's a list of the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled for the next week and for the last week of December. In case you want to access the previous videos, they can be accessed on SciSec's YouTube channel. As usual, we'll be having an assessment after this webinar, which will be kept open for 60 minutes. The questions will be from topics already covered in this webinar. Those who get 12 or more than 12 marks out of 15 will be provided with a certificate of achievement. Those who are unable to take the assessment will be provided with a certificate of participation. At the end of the assessment, you will also be asked to provide your feedback. Please give your genuine feedback and be assured that it will have no bearing on your assessment. Please provide your details clearly while taking this assessment, as a certificate will be generated based on these details. The link of the assessment will be shared in the Q&A chat session. Please note that this assessment is open only to those who have participated in the entire webinar. Now, I'll take this opportunity to introduce today's speakers for the webinar. We have with us Mr. Seshadri. With nearly 3 decades of experience in diverse industries like manufacturing, engineering services, and IT services, Mr. Seshadri currently serves as the Senior Director of Governance, Risk and Compliance Program under the Office of CISO. He's a part of the leadership team in the Office of CISO. He's an active member of HBR Advisory Council and has also been selected as Chair IAPP KnowledgeNet Bangalore Chapter. We welcome you, sir. We also have with us Mr. N.S. Srivatsa. He is an Engineering Director for Stealth at Unisys India Technology Center. He is responsible for providing engineering leadership for development of products related to network security, cloud, and biometrics. He has more than 20 years of development experience. He also leads Unisys India level initiative called Grace Sales and is a member of Technology Board in Asia Pacific Engineering Practice. We welcome you, sir. I'm sure there'll be a lot to gain from today's session. Now over to the speakers to start with the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shikha. I'll share my screen and let me know once you're able to see my screen.
We can see Shri.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Let's get started. So the topic that we have for today is called Zero Trust Decoded. There were Zero Trust topics earlier as a part of the Samgacchadhwam series. What we want to do during this topic is to make it friendlier. And if you go back with the feeling that Zero Trust is good, elegant, and it's easy with the right technologies, then our purpose is served. So let's get started. Shika did a great job of introducing us, so I will not try to bore you with the same introduction again. It's a pleasure and privilege to be talking to you all. So let me go to the next slide. This is how we have structured our talk. It's a two-part series. During the first part, initially we'll start with what we know, that is for us as speakers, to get a good idea of what is the mix of the audience so that we can tweak the presentation and the pitch accordingly. Then we'll take you through a quick vocab or jargon busting. We're going to use a lot of jargon because we can't avoid that. We'll try to make it as friendly as possible. But we'll give you a quick intro so that you can remember most of that during the talk. And then the core part of it about zero trust. Why zero trust? What is zero trust? So what? How does it make a difference? And so what for me, in the sense, how does it make a difference for me? And then we get into the how part of zero trust. And then maybe touch on a few aspects of why most of the people think zero trust is not easy. At the end of it, I've called it quiz here, but the assessment will do a check on what we've learned. In the next session, which is on 9 December, we'll do a quick quiz on what we remember from this session and then do a recap. And we'll actually show you zero trust in action with our own product and using right examples that can resonate with you and a demo of zero trust in action, which means at the end of it, you'll be able to appreciate the fact that zero trust is not really difficult. And what does the future hold? And again, one more quiz to keep it interesting and what in terms of what is the takeaway. So overall, it's a two-part series. The best way to benefit from this series is to attend both the parts, and that's what we would advise as well. In terms of zero trust itself, I think this is what the flow will look like. Why do we care about zero trust? Why did the industry evolve towards zero trust? What is zero trust really in a rememberable way? How does it fit into the security paradigm? And is there a paradigm shift? There is. We'll talk about that. Why is zero trust different? Why do people think zero trust is complex? How does it look like in action, and what will the future look like? So that's what we will cover. Some quick education. There are a lot of terms that we're going to use, so I'll just cover that. To make it easier for you, we've divided most of the jargon into 2 or 3 categories. You can imagine an attack, and you can imagine what should be done to defend. When you say defend, you're looking at how do you protect, how do you detect, as well as how do you respond. Now, these are the terms that we'll use throughout. Assets are things that you are going to protect, whether it is hardware, software, or data. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses or flaws that exist in your security system, which can be leveraged to gain access, or which can be leveraged to gain unauthorized access. We'll keep using the word attack surface. Attack surface is nothing but how many places are there for people to enter your system. It means how many, it's like if you have a fort, how many doors do you have? And vectors are nothing but the pathways that attackers can use to enter as well as propagate through your system. Breach is if somebody gains access to either a system or data that has been protected. If somebody gains unauthorized access, then you call it a breach. Now, kill chain is something that might be new for some of you. Any cyber attack happens in multiple stages. The various stages of cyber attack, right from the early stage of something getting compromised to your data getting exfiltrated. Maybe it's easy to remember that as a kill chain, the series of steps involved in a cyber attack. Endpoints are basically devices that you protect. Firewalls, or whether it's hardware, software, or set of policies, combination of all of that, which are used to protect your network, whether it is to act as a barrier between the outside world and the inside world, or within the network to create barriers wherever you want. Antivirus, you can imagine that as a software that protects other software on your system. Segment, not talking about from a network perspective, a network segment, but segment in terms of English is a way to bifurcate your network into separate portions. We'll keep using the word segment. That's why I stressed on why we use segment or how we'll use segment. DMZ is a short term for demilitarized zone. This is almost like the Porsche in your house, in the sense physically belongs to your house but faces outside. So in any network, when you have assets or services that are facing the outside world, which are technically kept in a zone which is not fully inside nor outside, let's call it DMZ for now. SIEM is a security incident and event management system, which means when you have a network and when you are worried about security, there are literally thousands of things that happen. You can't really monitor all of that. You really need a comprehensive system that can take care of monitoring, evaluating, assessing, and even acting on time. How do you manage and respond to threats? You use a SAM usually. Isolate is you take something in your network or system and you separate it either by design or by action. Quarantine is similar to isolate, but let's assume you want to add more restrictions. Forensics is what you do in terms of a detailed investigation after an attack happened. Why did it happen? How did it happen? And what should you really record about it legally? Authenticate is if somebody claims they are someone, you verify that claim and you, in a trustworthy way, how do you establish that this is the person they claim to be? Authorize is when somebody wants to do something, determine whether they're allowed to do that in terms of access levels. So authenticate and authorize almost go hand in hand, but they're different. IAM is nothing but a system that takes care of identity, your access and management. You have various people that are going to be part of your network, their identity, their roles, their privileges, what do they access, under what circumstances. You need an IAM for all of those. Hopefully, these jargon come with a lot of other connotations, and there's a lot more we can talk about it. But hopefully, in these 2 or 3 minutes, we gave you enough info to remember. This is what you'll need for the rest of the presentation. Maybe Sesh, you can take over from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go
Perfect.
on.
Okay. So, Sri, that was a real speed jargon buster, right? So fantastic. Um, so, if before I go to this chart, right, since Sri was talking about attack and defend, I mean, I remember one very interesting incident at some point. Somebody said, what does respond mean, right? In a normal war kind of a scenario, when somebody attacks you, you respond, which means you counter attack, right? Unfortunately, in cybersecurity, you don't do that. You only, when somebody attacks you, you only defend, right? There is, so did somebody asked us whether respond means actually do you go and counter attack, right? So so here respond is really about how do you respond to that attack, and how do you make sure you get out of that in a fairly a good way, so that you're not really losing either your data or whatever, right? So of course, as we move forward, and as we are starting to see cybersecurity evolve from being a defend only kind of a situation to something called active defense, right? Which is another topic by itself, but I just wanted to bring that point here before I really moved on to the presentation, um, Shri. Okay, so looking at this slide, what you're going to see is a graph that's going up, right, which is fantastic. So the reason we put this chart up is, there is no presentation that goes today, or webinar that happens today, without talking about two very interesting things in the cybersecurity space, and they are kind of conflicting, right? So on the one hand, you have the global market looking to grow, and you can see from this chart, right? from 2020 to 2023, right? There is a cumulative annual growth rate, which is the CAGR at 8.3%, right? And it's a fairly big industry, 168 billion. This is what I think Gartner is projecting. This is the global market, right? So on one hand, you have growth. On the other hand, you have skill shortage, right? And the same global market today has apparently the latest report, 2020 Cybersecurity Workforce Study report, says that we have close to 3 million people that have a, we have a skill shortage of 3 million people globally in cybersecurity. So, that's why I said it's interesting. One hand, you have growth and probably the highest growth rate among all the IT services. On the other hand, you have a huge gap in skills. So, I mean, for the audience today, right, who are in this call, I know we have a mixture of students, academicians, working professionals, right? This is, I mean, especially when, young budding students who are probably in their college or just finished college, this is a great area to get in because not many industries have this kind of a gap or dichotomy where there is growth on one hand and there is a gap on the other hand, right? So coming back even to our own Indian market, right? We NASSCOM tracks some of these things, and recently they provided an estimate saying about 35 billion US dollar revenue opportunities there, and they are saying that by year 2025 we want to get there. I think today we are about 17 billion from India market perspective, and that again amounts to a CAGR of more than 10%, right? Even in the India market, it is in fact growing faster than the global market. And the same thing happens in India. If you just mirror the problem of skill shortage, India needs about 1 million cybersecurity professionals, and our shortage is 9% higher than the global average. I mean, the message, the reason I spend a little time on this is, this is a very, very good field to be in. It's a great emerging field. And as we talk through some of these, the, the attack vectors and, the attack surfaces increasing and so on, you will realize that these numbers are just a tip of the iceberg. It's just going to grow exponentially. Okay. Shri, next slide, please. So we'll talk about why zero trust. So as Sri mentioned in the earlier slides, we want to talk about why, and then we'll talk about what, and then we'll talk about some approaches. We'll talk about some challenges, and we'll talk about some of the response mechanisms, and then of course everybody should be benefited by seeing this in action in the next meeting. So please make sure you attend it. Coming back to this slide, so this is again, number of things that are happening in the IT ecosystem, and changes have been very rapid. Now, the world is marching towards the digital economy, and so is India, and there are changes expected to be exponential, right? And it's happened in the past, it's expected to happen in the future, because you will have more smartphones, you will have more IoT devices, you will have 5G that gets adopted parallelly, I mean across the world, in a staggered manner, right? So the volume of data is increasing, the volume of users are increasing. um, Users are having multiple devices, and hence they have more assets. Organization have more assets. We have more assets at home because we use IoT, right? So the reason all these, I mean, with all these happening, what the net impact is that the attack surface has become very large, right? Everything that can get connected to a network is potential for intrusion. So that becomes an attack surface, and the attack vectors also are increasing. So what do we mean by attack vector? For example, today many of you would have heard phishing, right? Or ransomware. You hear that in the newspapers. Many companies have to pay ransomware to get their files back. They pay in Bitcoin. So these things are continuously happening. The malicious code is there. Website defacements are happening. And keep in mind, while all this is happening, the attackers are also getting very, very smart. And briefly, Sri talked about the kill chain. So the attackers also have a very, very very, very good process, to to make sure they do a very good attack and not get detected, right? So they do have a process. And MITRE and other frameworks really talk about the attack framework. But what I'm trying to say is, as we get smarter, we use AI, we use ML and all that, right? Attackers also are getting sophisticated. And with each attack, they're also learning a lot, and they're kind of making sure that they don't make their own mistakes. And at the same time, we have a COVID kind of a situation, so there is work from home. And that has made the attack surface even larger. So earlier we used to sit in our offices, we were inside the company network. Today we are working from home, connecting either through VPN or through other devices, IPsec devices. And then that increases the attack surface even more than ever before. Now, the time to respond also increase, keeping up with all these changes. And, later in the slides, we'll also talk about how a few respond techniques, how Unisys is also doing it and how market in general does it. From an application architecture standpoint, all of us are aware that every company wants to adopt cloud. So cloud adoption, especially after the COVID and all of that, has really enhanced and become very, very every company wants to do that. Containers is a big area in cloud adoption. Container orchestration tools like Kubernetes. So whole application architecture itself is also undergoing a huge transformation as people are looking to move things to the cloud. And then with disruptions like COVID, right, changes have become even more pronounced than before. And governments are also looking to change policies. Today we have work from home policy that government is extending in India, etc., etc. Right. So overall, I think the message from this slide is there is a very fast changing IT ecosystem that is changing so rapidly that we have never seen such a thing in the past. And this is making this whole the whole cybersecurity again a huge area because for all these reasons. Shri, next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about the traditional perimeter security, and you can see here on this chart, you'll see an organization, you'll see a boundary kind of a thing which we call the perimeter, right? So it's defined here and so on. But the traditional IT network security is based on this concept called fort and moat. Fort is typically what you see. You go to Jaipur, you'll see a lot of forts, right? That's a fort. And a moat. A moat is really, a deep, wide ditch that is surrounding a castle or a fort, and typically filled with water, and really intended to make it a defense against an attack, right? So, from a fort and moat security standpoint, it is very hard to obtain access from outside the network. Uh, but everyone inside the network, so think of it as a boundary like you're seeing, but everyone inside the network, by default, they're trusted, right? So it's tough to get in, but once you're in, you're all trusted, right? The problem really with this approach is, it's just that one single point of failure. Once the attacker gains access to the network, then they will have a free reign over the entire inside of it, right? And also the vulnerability in this approach is becoming more and more pronounced because of the fact that companies no longer have their data in just one place. And given the cloud adoption, you have companies having data across multiple cloud vendors, which makes it even more difficult to have a single security control for the entire network, right? So the traditional perimeter, really, if you look at even this diagram, a compromised device used by an attacker, one endpoint or something, can actually give them complete access to their entire organization's network. Next slide, please. So essentially, what we are saying is the perimeter has dissolved. And if you look at the for some of the Star Trek fans, if you recognize the diagram there, it is Spock, right? And you can see a dissolved Spock, which means that really the perimeter has dissolved. And again, we spoke about IoT. We spoke about cloud. We spoke about bring your own device. Again, we have some jargons we are using here, but BYOD is bring your own device. So many organizations are allowing individuals to bring their own devices. Sorry, excuse me for a minute. So what does bring your own device mean? So, you go to a company, they give you a laptop, you have to configure it to the company thing. Then you have your own machine and it gets configured. So people really want, the youth want that flexibility, saying I'll just use one device. So organizations have to make sure they are doing the right packaging and having the right applications there that allow a seamless use between office and home. Now, work from home. So we had work from home to the extent of about 5% in the past, and COVID-19 has really got it to more than 80%, right? And this seems to be the new norm going forward. 80% may not, or 90% may not be the work from home, but it's definitely not going to go back to less than 10%. It's going to be somewhere in between. So work from home is the new norm, right? Then VPN, right? Virtual private network. So many of us try to connect to our office networks using VPN. So the VPN gateways are all choked. Costs of VPN have tremendously gone up. Companies have not budgeted it. So, those stuff. Software defined perimeter, software defined everything. So you can see software defined network, software defined perimeter. So software is really defining all these infrastructure today. And then on top of it, you have COVID-19, right? So which has really done a huge amount of disruption. So, the takeaway really is that the perimeter has dissolved. We always say that the VPN is dead, right? I mean, we want to use devices beyond the VPN. So, so, and that really gets us to the next slide, which talks about, what is the big change, right? And this is a very interesting, some of you may have seen this, right? It would have taken in the past many years, multi-year programs, multi-year organization, digital transformation. They would hire a chief digital officer, chief transformation officer, and then this is a kind of a MCQ saying who led the digital transformation in your company. So it's very interesting that what used to take multi-year programs just happened overnight. Within weeks, organizations were ready. They were able to get people to work from home, start looking at putting stuff in the cloud and so on. So the whole journey has really accelerated. Next slide. Now, we talked a little bit about the sophistication and the attackers and how the attacks have also changed. Now, if you look at some of the numbers, there has been a steep increase in cyber attacks in India over the last few years. And CERT-In is really the agency that tracks it in India. So they have seen that since the lockdown that was announced in March, we have seen 500% increase in cyber attacks, right? So really, it's a huge thing. And recently I was reading a report from Kaspersky, report on the cybersecurity state, and it says that 90% of the corporate data breaches in the cloud happen due to social engineering attacks, which targets customers' employees, right? Which means that there is a human element here, right? The threat is really coming from the people. It can be coming from inside. It has changed from physical attacks to identity based attacks. In fact, 90% of the breaches start with some kind of a human error, right? Either it can be a phishing mail, which means a fraudulent mail sent to trick you into taking or clicking a link, or entering your credentials so that they can do credential harvesting and then use that credentials to come into your network, and then they laterally move, right? Or it could be fake websites, websites with fake information, bad links, or some funny or phony offers and so on, or bad files, right? Bad code, malicious code embedded in them and so on. Also, beyond the actual numbers, we are also seeing that the cost of data breach has also grown by 12% in 2019. And Ponemon Institute and IBM Security, actually, they produced this report. So besides the overall number of breaches, the cost of breach has also gone tremendously high over the last few years. So basically, the focus of the attack has changed from attacking entities to people, right? And then you can't trust anyone. So people by mistake, they do a few things. Now there is ignorance, and then there is actually malicious intent, right? The insiders could have malicious intent, a disgruntled employee is serving his notice period and he can go and do some bad things, right? So you can't trust any person, you can't trust any device, right? So that really has has given us that situation where we are in today, right? Next slide. So what should we do to adapt, to survive in this? And if you look at the Charles Darwin's famous saying, it says it's not the strongest or the most intelligent survive, it's the one that's most adaptable to change. So we all have to change. This is not an option, but I think it's a mandate today. Now, how do we start looking at security now, right? So we talked about the fort and moat, where you can there is a wall, but once you get in, then you have a free access to everything, right? So how do we discard that and become more different, which we'll talk about, right? And then how do we really break things into smaller chunks, right? Break security perimeters into smaller zones, maintain separate access for separate parts of the network. For example, for example, a network with files living in a single data center that may contain dozens of separate secure zones. So what happens is a person or program with access to one of these zones may not be having access to the other zone without a separate authorization. So we are kind of making us ourselves stronger by making ourselves smaller, right? By breaking stuff down. And then, of course, we are also going to focus on insider, right? And today, a lot of companies are also embarking on the insider threat program and so on, right? So, yeah. Next slide.
Yes, by the way, we added Charles Darwin here to break the monotony a bit. Lighter. Charles Darwin didn't exactly say this. That's what session we were discussing yesterday. Somebody paraphrased Charles Darwin's original work, and then somebody else reused it, and that's how this saying evolved. But still, it's an interesting
Yeah,
argument.
absolutely. And I think it's so relevant. I have seen this from the beginning of my career, and today also it's so relevant, right? So whoever did that small tweak, I think did a good job.
Yes. Go ahead, Shish. I'll move to the next slide.
Yeah. So what you could do to approach that, right? I mean, what are the things we could do, right? Then shrink the attack surface to decrease cyber attacks. Then, so there are techniques to do that. And then when you shrink the attack surface, then that lowers your breach potential. Now, having said all this, right, companies can invest all their cybersecurity budget on the protect part or detect part, but it's inevitable that bad things will happen, right? Now, that's where the question of resilience comes in, the question of how do you respond, how do you recover back, and do you have mechanisms to really have real-time responses to bad behavior, right? So you need an approach that kind of takes care of all of this. Next slide. And that approach is zero trust, right? So we do believe that zero trust has got all the elements that we talked about as really challenges that we are seeing, given the skill shortage, given the growing market, given the perimeter being dissolved, given the attack surfaces going up, given the attack vectors are going up, right? Given all that, right, we see that zero trust is an approach or a journey, some people may say, right, that actually starts thinking about this problem and the security model in a slightly different. And then let's move to understand what is zero trust, and I'll hand this over back to Sri.
Thank you, Sesh. So I think Sesh set a wonderful, what do I say, path to the presentation so far in terms of establishing the need for zero trust, how everything else is changing, and why it's imperative for us to adapt to all these changes and evolve, whether it's in terms of technologies that you use, whether it's in terms of approach, or whether it's in terms of our own mindset and beliefs. Now, the good thing is we actually completed about half an hour of the presentation without telling you exactly what is zero trust. So that was the fun part of the presentation. So now we'll tell you what is zero trust. So the zero trust was something that was, the term itself was coined almost 10 years back by one of the analysts at Forrester Research. And over the last 10 years, I think slowly zero trust gained more prominence. And as the situation changed, zero trust became more and more important. Now it's an imperative. And why do I say that? As late as August 2020, NIST released a draft on zero trust. I'd strongly recommend that you can have a look at that. It's really available if you are interested in zero trust as an approach at a deeper level. So this is something that has evolved at least for over 10 years, but now it's gaining a lot of momentum, which means you see much more evolution as well as innovations happen in this area. Now, there are a set of assumptions that make up the zero trust model. What we're going to talk about is what are the assumptions that make up the zero trust model? What are the elements that go into zero trust model? What are the principles that dictate the model? And how does the zero trust architecture actually look like? Hopefully, that's a good way to look at zero trust in a way where you can appreciate the ingredients that make up the zero trust and how zero trust looks like. Now, the fundamental assumptions that define the zero trust model are one is the network that you have is always assumed to be hostile. Earlier, most of the orgs, you didn't have people working from outside or nobody connecting from mobile or their laptops, I mean, maybe much earlier. So you always had the concept of an organization network. Everything within that network was supposed to be safe, and everything outside was supposed to be unsafe or untrusted. But now the network itself is assumed to be hostile, which means whether you are inside the network or outside the network, it's not safe, it's not easy to trust. And then the threats don't just exist outside the network, they exist both external and internal. Externally and internally, there are threats always. And then who to trust does not depend on where that person is, which means just because somebody is already inside the network, it does not mean your level of trust goes up. So the concept of somebody coming into a network and after that they're a trusted entity, that goes. I will talk more about that in terms of what's the impact of that later. Now, every device, every user, and the entire network flow has to be authenticated and authorized. I used all these terms earlier, which means every action that's taking place inside the network, it need not be a smooth action. It has to be authenticated and authorized. That's an essential ingredient of zero trust. And the last one, policies. Most of the times earlier, you would define your security policy and convert those into rules, and they kind of get baked into the network. But now, no, the policies are very dynamic. The policies keep getting calculated, the policies keep getting better. And your intelligence about what is good or what is bad that's happening in the network, that keeps getting better. Maybe imagine both AI and machine learning playing a role there, which means the more you know about your network, the more you know about what is safe and what is a threat, or rather you're in a better position to analyze what should be allowed and what not to be allowed on the network. So let's assume these are the basic assumptions that we take. What we really want you to appreciate is the fact that all these assumptions were the other way around when we had the traditional uh, fort and moat kind of model. Okay, all of these are fundamental changes, which means your assumptions are changing. And then in terms of elements, whether you're looking at data or when you create a zero trust network, what are the elements you need to look at? Look at how your data is organized, what is critical, what is not critical, what is supercritical. How do you look at your users? Do you have multiple levels of privileges or authorization controls, multiple levels of rule-based authorizations? How do you look at your devices? What do you trust, what you don't trust? How do you look at your network traffic? What is your technical ability to look at the network traffic and derive intelligence out of that and make decisions around that? How do you look at your applications? Do you have categories in terms of where your applications are? Where are they hosted? How are they behaving? Do you know how to monitor them? Do you gain intelligence out of that? So let's say you look at all these elements. It's kind of nice to categorize these into elements because it helps us simplify the model in some way. So you took assumptions, you took elements that make up the zero trust model, and then actually look at a set of principles. If you're implementing a new network model, you'll write down these are the things that I want to implement in the network. So we simplified it to about 4 principles, or rather more hidden here. And we converted this from technical jargon into English so that it's easy to remember and appreciate. But otherwise, these can be articulated as 4 or 5 technical phrases. Now, where you are connecting from in a network does not determine what you can access, which means your location does not determine how much you are trusted or what is your level of security. That's one of the principles. The next principle is that whatever service you are trying to access and whether access to that service is granted or not is really based on what the infrastructure knows about you, not just your identity. It's based on context, which means what did you do before or what is the overall behavior, and then whether you need to know. The need to know being enforced is another ingredient of zero trust, which means anything that you do in the network, are you allowed to do that? Are you authorized to do that? Do you need to do that? That becomes an essential ingredient. The other principle is every service that you access has to be authenticated, authorized, and encrypted. Which just because you're in the network does not mean the traffic is plain text and somebody can sniff through it. Even within the network, every access, there's a check which says you are the person who you claim to be, you're authorized to do that action, and then whatever you're doing is encrypted between, let's say, A and B on the network. Anything that happens is encrypted. So, which means for every request, we make sure it's verified and it's never trusted. That's one of the key principles of zero trust. And then the fourth one, which Shesh is going to elaborate a lot on further in the presentation, you log everything on the network, you inspect, you analyze, you derive intelligence, and based on that, you recognize risks and threats, and you act. And you just don't act, you actually act quickly because when it comes to network security, it takes time to recognize what's happening. It takes time to recognize a threat, and to act on the threat is not easy because you're supporting hundreds of thousands of users. You can't randomly disrupt their access, but how quickly you act to reduce threats and how determinedly you act or how accurately you act matters a lot. So the speed is something that we're going to talk about. So we spoke about assumptions, elements, principles. Hopefully you are with me so far. I just put this slide from Microsoft to simplify what we've told so far, which means on the left side, you have the users, the applications, the devices, and all the elements on the left side. And then when they try to do something, which means that when they try to access whether it's applications or data, then you verify every attempt and then you also ensure that sometimes it needs multi-factor authentication, and then you decide whether you want to allow access or whether you want to block access. So we are at a stage where we know what are the assumptions that go into zero trust, what are the elements, what are the principles, and deliberately repeating all of this so that it's easy for us to stick with me. Otherwise, I don't want to lose you as an audience, and I can't see you yawn. We don't have a video, so as a speaker, that's a trick I'm using. So we use a magic wand in between. We put some magic in between to realize the architecture. Just because you have all these 3 elements doesn't mean you can design our architecture. We actually introduced something called a control plane. That's the one that makes the architecture possible for zero trust. Otherwise, you have invested so much on your network, firewalls, switches, routers, and everything. You can't just throw away all of that. And zero trust does not mean you revamp your network with new hardware, new software, nothing like that. Let's say you introduce a concept called control plane. Control plane is not a single entity. It's a concept. It can be one entity or multiple entities, which essentially take care of authenticate everything that's happening on the network, authorize everything that's happening on the network, whether it's a user or a device. And then how we do it, it's not a centralized mechanism. This can be distributed, can be granular, and it can be context-based. Too much of jargon there. In simpler English, earlier we talked about the fort and moat approach. Instead of having a central entity to guard the whole fort, how about imagining 100 small forts within the fort you've already built? And each fort has a separate guard, and each guard takes care of making sure everything inside that is protected. Isn't that much better? Otherwise, you have a breach in the fort, the entire population in the fort is exposed, right? So, how do you authenticate? How do you authorize everything living or non-living in a granular manner, in smaller chunks? And then how do you establish trust, not just based on what is the ID that person is carrying, what has been the security score, what has been the behavior, and is the trust something that is getting stronger based on behavior and analysis? And then after that, you establish a secure path. If A is talking to B on the network, irrespective of the transaction, it has to be encrypted. So you configure something called as a tunnel. When I say tunnel, loosely imagine it to be a secure path between two entities in the network. So this is the new thing that gets added to the zero trust architecture, in addition to everything that you know about security and network. So that is how we come to the architecture. When I say architecture again, it's not a architecture in black and white. This is how it would look. Traditionally, you would look at network security architecture like this. Saish was talking about the fort and moat approach long back, right? It was just 20 minutes back. So usually when you look at a traditional network, you have a demilitarized zone, which means there is an internet outside where remote users are coming from or your clients are coming from. Then there are edge servers, whether it's your VPN or whether it's your firewall or whether it can be any kind of server, which is, I'm just calling that as edge server. Then you have the intranet, which contains your critical servers, and you have even more mission critical servers. You have some kind of layering, right? And then you're building a model where anything outside is untrusted, and you're slowly moving towards more trust and privileged on the right side, which means this is how you look at your network. When it comes to zero trust, this is the only change that happens. You introduce the control plane that we spoke about a minute back, and then you look at providing tunnels or encryption for everything within the network. Now, there's a new word that I'm adding, cloaking. What cloaking does is even when you enter a network, you should not be able to see everything that's there on the network. You'll only be able to see what you are allowed to see. Everything else is invisible, which means even if somebody succeeds in breaching a network, they can't find out where is what. It's like breaking into a house and you don't know where the safe is. It's invisible. So what we do really infect after that? So cloaking takes care of hiding things or making things disappear. And then every access should be verified and authorized. Those are the three things that you add in terms of the control plane. And then you make sure that everything is, or rather, you treat everything as untrusted, which whether you're inside the network or outside the network. This is essentially the zero trust architecture. I just saw a message pop up on the screen saying can't hear. Is that true, or I didn't check the chat so far?
No, sir, it's fine.
All right, thanks, Sika. So these are the only four things that make up a zero trust architecture. Everything else can remain the same. Now, the other thing is when I say cloaking, you usually achieve it through encryption. And when you have point-to-point tunneling and encryption and you enforce what people see is what they're allowed to see, you're almost achieving cloaking. When we demonstrate one of our products called Stealth, just to show you how Zero Trust works, you'll appreciate cloaking much better. We'll show you how a network can be segmented or micro-segmented and cloaking can be achieved even there. Um, so the paradigm shift is you had a concept of outside, inside, untrusted, trusted, and you have a user once you authenticate, he gets access to data or she gets to access to data. That paradigm change it. We are changing it to a simpler way where you have something you want to protect in the center. I'm calling it data right now, but everything that you want to protect, make it small, add encryption around it, add a control plane around it, and the user is really outside that, which means what you're protecting is smaller and perfectly wrapped around. Uh, so there was a missing piece that we didn't talk about earlier. I promised you that we'll talk only about assumptions, elements, principles, and architecture. Now we have a surprise. We're going to talk about the technologies that make up Zero Trust as well. So, what about the technologies? We'll organize them into technologies that you need for protecting, detecting, and responding to threats. This is how we'll look at the technologies that are associated with Zero Trust. Now, I put the diagram of Zero Trust elements on the left side. Now, look at the technologies. These are the hexagons that we've added here. This is not the complete list, but this is a friendlier list that's easy to appreciate and remember. Microsegmentation is the way you can divide your network into smaller segments and be able to manage that, not just from management perspective, be able to restrict traffic within that segment so that anybody who's part of a macro segment is really treating that as their world. And then you have multi-factor authentication. We spoke about authentication. Multi-factor is nothing but, if you look at authentication, it's based on three principles. What you know, like a password, what you have, like a cell phone or a device, and who you are, like your fingerprint or your iris, eye scan or facial scan. Multi-factor authentication is really about making sure that you use more than one to authenticate who the person is, not just based on password or not just based on OTP or combine both of that. Identity and access management is a complete system that takes care of authenticating people and what they can access. And user and network behavior analytics is a very huge area in itself. A lot of things happen on your network. How do you make sure that you have technology that can analyze, act on things that go bad as well as prevent? Then endpoint security, you have literally tens of thousands of endpoints that make up a network. How do you ensure that every endpoint is clean and can be trusted and that does not become the weak link of your network? And encryption of every communication that goes on in your network, which is the key tenet of Zero Trust. In addition to this, when you look at user and network behavior analytics, do you have some kind of scoring that takes care of establishing trust based on behavior? And I would say that with a bit of care, because these days, when you look at an attack or a kill chain, the attackers don't do anything unusual. Shesh was talking about it, right? The attackers have changed too. It's not like anybody who breaches your network is desperate and suddenly does a set of things and get caught. A kill chain can actually last for months together, right from the first um, infiltration to what they do or how they laterally move across the network can last for months together, which means your software or analytic software will never catch it because nothing unusual comes out. So Zero Trust is really taking care of that as well. How do you micro segment your network in a way where even if your network gets breached, you really don't lose anything because most of the network is micro segmented and hidden and cloaked. All of these technologies exist, but there's something critical that stands out. Microsegmentation as a key technology and key enabler of zero trust. That's a new, we feel that's relatively new compared to the others, or rather, that's a differentiator compared to the other technologies that you know about zero trust so far. So that's why we highlighted that box. What does microsegmentation do? Basically, when you have a very hugely connected network, how to separate into logical micro networks. When I say micro networks, you should not imagine designing a network and switches in a way where you create smaller networks. Don't look at it as, what do you call that? The subnets that you create on the switch, we're not talking about that. We're really looking at logically taking your network, treating it as a flat network, and how to group things in an encrypted manner. We're going to demonstrate that in part 2. So how do you basically take users, devices, applications, and put them together and establish a group of trust, for example? So I spoke about endpoint security, identity, cloaking, and encryption, all of those enabling microsegmentation. So in a diagram, how do I depict this? Let's say you have a set of web servers, or whether you have a set of app servers or a set of database servers. And let's say you define microsegments where those servers, their users, and the devices that are attached to that, all of that gets defined as a microsegment. And if you can succeed in keeping the traffic in blue box separate from the traffic in red box, separate from the traffic in green box, then you've actually achieved microsegmentation, including encryption and cloaking at a significant level. We'll show you how that works as well. So what that means is even if somebody breaks into something, unless they had business of dealing with one of these, they won't even be exposed to that band or that microsegment. Hopefully you're with me so far. I saw a question pop on the control plane while I was talking. This is a very busy slide. All we want to communicate is that when a user is trying to access a resource, he's basically treated as an untrusted entity. And there is a policy engine and a policy administrator who kind of define what can be done, what can't be done, or an intelligent entity in the network that continuously upgrades itself. And that's a control plane which takes care of ensuring that everybody is treated as untrusted and what happens before they're trusted. To do that, really, you need a strong identity management system, you need a strong SIEM system, and then certificates or threat intelligence, activity logs. All of these systems make up a proper realistic architecture. Don't want to go into each of the boxes there. So we spoke about what is zero trust, and then towards zero trust, is it an architecture that you just buy a set of hardware and software and then next day you have zero trust up and running? Maybe not. What does zero trust look like? Journey, is that a set of steps or is it a right switch thing? Or is it a journey? Let's ask Sesh.
Thank you so much. If you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so we kind of tried to give some approach to, how do we achieve that state, right? It's a journey. I mean, a journey has got a destination, but journey is going to take some time, right? So, and it's an enterprise-wide initiative typically. So it's not, so because it's an enterprise-wide initiative, there is also many things related to change management and so on. So it is a multi-year, multi-phase kind of an approach, and it takes time to implement. So what we recommend is really take your time, phase the project out, spread the investment. So it's not going to come without investment, spread it over a few financial years, and also prioritize investments based on business impact. Today, there are a number of tools that allow you to really say, you given a budget, let's say an X amount, how do you make sure you invest that amount, because the budgets are not going to be unlimited, right? If I have X amount, how do I invest in the area that is most impacting me, right? In terms of risks, right? So take a risk and a business focus, that will allow you to focus on protecting critical information assets first, and then it'll also start justifying investment, because somebody who's giving you the money is also looking for returns, right? So you need to start showing them some results, and therefore when you start protecting your critical assets, you will start seeing some results. And then determine an overall strategy, and it's very important to have one, right? It's just not a technology, right? Look at say a greenfield project, cloud environments, new systems, places where you're doing digital transformation. They're all great places to start. They are also conducive for a new security model like zero trust. Then when you have new systems, you start building zero trust by design, and it should not be bolted or retrofitted, right? And as legacy systems are always go have an end of life, as they start changing or they get retired, you start bringing in the zero trust model to be part of the deployment strategy. Also, this is a change management, right? And the change management part is the most difficult, because every change has got to do with mindset, right? We saw what Darwin was saying, right? So it's about mindset, and how you want to adapt to change, not only you but your leadership team, your senior management, people who have invested. So you need to have a good change management program for this. Now, having said all that, right, should something happen, you should also have mechanisms to isolate critical data or system, or also remediate them, so that um, your downtime is not too large. Next slide. Now, the challenges for zero trust adoption, as I said, since it's multi-year, the challenges are, many, right? And though zero trust sounds pretty cool and all that, many organizations, why haven't they adopted it fully, right? Clearly, there are some challenges. Um, Also, at a high level, we see that based on our collective experience, we see that there are, 5 or 6 areas that we're trying to chart here in the slide. One is really cost. So companies have already invested in the traditional perimeter models, and now they are looking for returns, and then now they have to start looking to invest in a new thing. So they will always think about sunken costs. Skills, we talked about the huge skill shortage. These models, security models, are not going to come through we through people who are not very experienced. You need experienced hands to do this. The technology focus as opposed to strategy focus, because it's a lot of technologies that Shri was talking about, whether it's microsegmentation or whether it's endpoint security, right? There is technology that is there. So it requires careful planning and strategy to. Many are still approaching security from the angle that if we throw a lot of money and throw a lot of technology, it will start working, right? But it's also a strategy. Legacy systems and environments. So many companies, we are not starting greenfield. We are not cloud native. We are not startups. We are companies that have been around for a long time. We have bought traditional and legacy systems. Now we are worried that move that traditional perimeter into the zero trust model. Then changing them will not be easy. In some cases, if you change it, things will stop working, and therefore you will have business impacts and so on. And then last, we talked a little bit about mindset change, uh, right? So that is a fundamental shift, in the way security is implemented. So there will be resistance from a lot of people, saying, is this working? Why should we do this? And so on and so forth. Next slide. Yeah, Shri, you want to talk through this slide?
Sure, Shesh. And even though you look at zero trust as a journey, there are a set of steps that you logically go through. And initially, you look at, or if you look at any model, for example, I think there's something called Forrester 5 Step to Zero Trust, or you just search for steps to zero trust, and there is a process defined on how you go about implementing zero trust. And most of them talk about how do you identify your data and how the data flows, your network and various elements, and how does your network flow look like, what is critical, what is privileged in terms of data inflow, what do you want to protect. Saish was talking about prioritize, right? You can't protect everything at the same time, so you have some kind of priority. And then you actually architect and design your network for zero trust. I spoke to you about zero trust principles as well as zero trust elements. You consider all those elements, consider what should zero trust implementation look like. And when you try to architect and design based on your data, your transactions and flows, when you try to define micro perimeters, which means instead of having a large perimeter, we said the perimeter is dead. Instead of having a large perimeter, you try to define micro perimeters. Now that's where it gets complex for a lot of people. In the sense, all of this is not easy. It can easily get humongous. It can get way out of control unless you are using the right technology that can assist you do this. And then you define zero trust policies in terms of who can access what. And then those policies can continue to evolve as you know more about your network. And then you implement it. After that, you continue to monitor the network, you inspect, you log, you analyze, and based on that, you recognize threats, you quickly act on those threats, you isolate. Now, that is how a zero trust implementation goes. And then, in terms of challenge, can get quite complex. Or do you have all the technologies that you need, and do you have all the views that can help you do it? That is where the complexity comes in. I've even seen articles that say zero trust is unwieldy or it's a impractical model. Maybe if you don't use the right technologies, yes. Now, there are few technologies that can help. For example, if you look at microsegmentation, which means zero trust talks about having smaller chunks which can be protected and managed easily. So, how do you make microsegmentation easy? If you try doing microsegmentation using network design, then again, that's going to get complex. So, if you use, let's say, identity-based microsegmentation, that will help you reduce complexity to a large extent. You can look at your complex hierarchical network as a flat network and then still achieve microsegmentation based on identity. And then what are the tools that you're going to use to discover, design, and deploy your network or a security model that can mimic zero trust for your network? That also would matter. So what we will do is when we demonstrate Stealth next week, Stealth is a product that is owned by Unisys and helps with microsegmentation as well. We're going to show you how zero trust works and how it makes it easy. And then when you look at monitoring, the speed of response actually matters. When you recognize a threat, we'll show you one of the technologies. Of course, there's a lot that can be demonstrated. We'll show you one of the technologies that we advertise that can help you isolate something in 10 seconds. So we call that dynamic isolation. When you have a threat, how quickly can you isolate that threat within 10 seconds? That is what we'll show. That's in the part 2. Now, when I say microsegmentation made easy, I've actually put in a snapshot here. We'll talk a bit about Unisys Stealth. Unisys Stealth is a microsegmentation, a product that does a lot more than microsegmentation. It's actually a suite of products. We're going to focus on one of them, which is called Stealth Core. It also deals with identity and access management as well. So Stealth helps you easily discover your network, analyze your network, and design a security model for your network and deploy that in a single click. That's the part we're going to focus on for this presentation. Of course, there's a lot more beyond that. This is a snapshot that we've included. For example, this is an interface of Stealth that can sit on your network, analyze the network traffic, or directly take your network logs in terms of PCAP files and draw this network for you, where it can say, I see that based on the flow that this seems to be one set of servers and this seems to be a database server, this seems to be an application server, and these seem to be a related group. And do you want to create a microsegment out of these? And with a few clicks, you can actually deploy a security model We're going to show that when we demo. That is Zero Trust in action. We have an entire ecosystem around Zero Trust, both our products as well as our partner products put together. How does an entire ecosystem for Zero Trust come together? I'm not going to go through each of these products here, but logically you can look at them as technologies and products that can help you protect, detect, respond, or recover, as well as predict and identify. So that way it's a complete circle. We're going to show you some of these in action, more for you to understand, remember, and appreciate Zero Trust better. Um, when I say better, I also meant faster. So, Shesh, you want to say why better and faster?
Absolutely. I know, and I know I have to do it faster also because we just have uh, 18 minutes. I want to definitely keep, there's some good questions that have come up and we definitely want to address that. So I would like to keep at least 10 to 15 minutes, 10 minutes for that. So we will go through this quickly. So what we are essentially saying here is that the traditional SIM, and remember SIM is security incident and event management. So these are generally platforms that allow you to analyze log traffic, analyze thing, and see if spot any malicious behavior, do a triaging, and then of course go ahead and resolve it. So typically what happens is malicious event occurs, a ticket is generated typically in your ticketing tools, then the event is analyzed, and then you remediate and close it, and it takes over 3 days if you're lucky, right? If in many cases you may not even know that a malicious event is there, if you have a lot of false negatives you won't even know, so 3 days could look like 30 days, right? So this is a best case scenario. And what we are talking about from a dynamic isolation standpoint, a little bit I'll talk about that in the subsequent slides, is being able to do that near real time. And I think 10 seconds is a good near real time number, right? So Unisys is saying that we would be able to detect some of these things and really move it to into a isolated, dynamically isolated, and do all this in 10 seconds. Next slide. This again talks about the same thing, right? It's slow, labor intensive, and today why we call it labor intensive is because traditional SIM technologies are being used, are being done through what we call the Security Operations Center, and some of you may be aware of it, right? And they can really be able to. There's a lot of skill involved when you have to operate, put a security operations center, and then there are complex decisions, whereas this is fast, automatic, and the rule based simple decisions. Next slide please. So this is a busy chart, and I'm not going to really go through every piece of it, but I will try to explain this in a couple of minutes, right? Let's say your laptop computer in the corporate network starts to perform a network scan, and typically you do port scans, right? Such behavior usually is the first sign of an endpoint that is being compromised. So typically in organizations, only a handful of users and endpoints within organizations are allowed to perform scans on a regular basis. And if you start seeing the first things attackers do, and we talked about the attacker mindset, the first thing they really do is when they enter a new environment, they want to assess the surroundings, right? So that's why endpoint network scans are always and most often, or I wouldn't say always, most often serve as a red flag. So you're already one step behind as an enterprise because a bad actor is already doing something on your network, right? So time is of the essence. So once this anomalous behavior, which is the network scanning, is detected, what stealth dynamic isolation really does is it gets deployed in seconds. And I'm not going to talk about the how of it, how it gets deployed, and we would probably next session go through that. But we will talk about what it does, right? Enforces security policies at the endpoint and to isolate it from the network. Now, dynamic isolation, what it really, very briefly, right, opens channels between the laptop or whatever endpoint is exhibiting this bad behavior or anomalous behavior and the security incident response team, right? Team that is responsible for responding to security incidents. That way, the team can investigate and remediate, and it may also involve removing the malware, for example, right? So after the automated system or the human team, which is the incident response team, they finish the remediation, dynamic isolation restores the laptop's full access to the enterprise network. This is a very important step in closing the loop and enabling businesses to optimize their resources, right? So again, briefly, Sri talked about vocabulary in the beginning, and he talked about what is the difference between isolation and quarantining, right? In dynamic isolation, it enables endpoints to continue functioning even when they are in a safe mode, right? Quarantine solutions means they shut down endpoints completely. So in the laptop example that I was talking about, this means that the employee with the scanning laptop could still continue working after dynamic isolation takes effect. The employee wouldn't have to sit idle while his laptop was unavailable and being given to the forensics team or the threat intelligence team or the incident response team, and he would not suffer from loss of productivity. So the fact that the dynamic isolation process doesn't interrupt business process is even more compelling, especially when the endpoint involved is a server, right? So imagine you're an online retailer and a server supporting your backend payment system starts doing a network scan. You could bring down that server, but you could lose a lot of revenue, right? A better approach is to use things like dynamic isolation. In this case, what happens is only that port or protocol exhibiting anomalous behavior is isolated dynamically, and you can continue working and ringing up your sales. So that is very briefly the dynamic isolation in a very, very short period, right? Next slide. So, again, the value proposition, reduction in attack surface, detection, and then fast response. Because as we said in the beginning, we may put, all of our budgets into protecting and detecting stuff, but, bad things do happen, right? Actors, the sophistication, this nation state, the attack is becoming sophisticated. So you have to be also prepared that given that there will be a breach, how do you respond? Next slide. So this is something that we are very proud of. And if you see the earlier chart, Forrester really coined the term zero trust. So we do have Forrester looking at Unisys and a bunch of other ecosystem platform providers. We've been rated as a very strong performer. There is the 19 criteria model, and it's really gives us a lot of confidence, gives our clients a lot of confidence. And and they write there, right? We believe Unisys Stealth embodies the zero trust principles of trusting no user or device inside or outside the private network. And very interestingly, in the RSA that happened in 2020, oh, did it happen 2020 or 2019? Yeah, 2019.
2020. So
2020, yeah. I'm because of this COVID, I've lost track of time. So
yes,
yeah,
yes,
so we allowed we had a $10,000 cash prize, and during the RSA conference we put up our stealth solution and we advertised it long, a week before that. And if hackers wanted to come in and really do a capture the flag kind of an event, they would get that prize. We found that participants were unable to hack Unisys system during the contest. We eventually gave that money away to the military, the I think the women's cybersecurity for women kind of an initiative. But that was really the strength of the stealth system. So summarizing this overall, next slide. Yeah, so networks are really expanding. We know we're talking about 5G coming in the future. We're already in the IoT revolution. Volumes are increasing. Hackers are getting smarter. And zero trust will be the preferred security model to protect our corporate and public networks. Micro segmentation, we talked about number of technologies. We focused on micro segmentation through stealth, and then that is really one of the big factors, big technologies that is needed to implement a zero trust. In the end, we feel it is not difficult, but you need the right technologies and, more importantly, the right mindset. And next week we're going to show you the demo. So I do hope that all of you are able to participate next week. The best you would get out of this experiences attending both the webinars, because you would see the theory, what we have seen here. I know some of these items may be a little fast. We have a lot of slides to cover. We covered a lot. But when you see stuff, in action from our side, then you really see how it works. With that, we have 10 minutes to wrap up the Q&A, and I'm going to take the first few questions, if you don't mind, Sri, on what we are seeing.
Sure. Yes.
So the one of the questions that came out is how I talked about active defense and defense, right? So what is the difference? So we talked about defend. In the case we said defend is protect, also being able to respond, right, and detect also. So when we say defense in this context of cybersecurity, what we are only trying to do is make sure our damages are minimum, right? We are only detecting, and then we are responding to make sure that we are isolating stuff. We are then doing a forensics, and then we are putting things back to normal. What active defense does is goes a little one step further, right, and really start thinking about what is the adversary, in this case a hacker. How does he engage with you, right? So what does an adversary do? So typical technologies that are used for active defense are deception technologies. So you really, I don't know, some of you may have heard of honeypots. So these are, really fake things that are put in your network. You VLAN it, you put it in one place, and then you have attackers coming. So you will study which IP addresses they're coming from which locations they're coming from, what are they trying to inject, some SQL injection or they're trying to do some remote code execution. So you're going to start analyzing or understanding the adversary's behavior, because unless you understand an adversary's behavior, you are not going to be able to respond or put protection. So that really is active defense, and frankly, it's a very, very new concept. MITRE recently has released something called MITRE Shield, which is a mechanism or a process, or I should say a methodology for active defense. But essentially, example of active defense is a honeypot or a honeynet, and some of those devices that are used in some of the networks today. So that is the first question. The second was really difference between security technology and security services. So technology typically are, products, right? So when we talk about, things like stealth, right? This is a product or a solution, and we deploy it in a place, and there's a licensing model and so on. So it's a product. Whereas when you talk about services, we typically talk about managed security services. So a company would outsource their, let's say their security operations center to us, and we provide that as a service. So security services is about providing a service on the security side. And I just took SOC as an example. It could be any security service. It could be services, it could be risk services, it could be threat intelligence services, it could be anything. Whereas security technology, in the context of what we said, was really a product. And the third question really was on the field of cybersecurity. Somebody asked whether certification or CGPA, both, right? I'm trying to read the question here. So if a person has an average CGPA but has mastered practical knowledge supported by certifications, do companies consider such personnel qualified for cybersecurity job? So cybersecurity in that sense is a fairly unique field. If you, let me put it the other way around. If you had great CGPA, you mastered everything, but you did not have practical knowledge, I don't think that is also a great thing, right? So I would say, having a reasonable CGPA, but having a very good practical knowledge, if you've done CEH, or if you've done ethical hacking, if you know how to be in the response teams or threat intelligence, really in the core technical knowledge areas, and have mastered something and do have practical knowledge, definitely companies are looking for such people. And certifications today also go a long way in supplementing your academic knowledge. And today, a lot of good cybersecurity certifications are available. So this is one field where I personally believe that having hands-on experience is very much valued and counted. Then I'll just quickly look at the other questions and probably pass a few to Shri. And we have covered a few things on challenges, and somebody's asked how organizations are gearing towards a zero trust model. What are the real world challenges? I think we've already spoken about it. Shri, do you want to talk a little bit on those zero trust applicable to network security, and then plane? I think you spoke. Talk a little bit about cloaking. You want to take that?
I'll do that. So, let's say, how do we achieve cloaking? Maybe look at it as a combination of microsegmentation and encryption. Next week, when we demonstrate zero trust, we will also demonstrate microsegmentation, and it almost becomes an obvious demonstration of cloaking as well. So that would be an interesting thing to look out for. Can control plane be single point for attack in zero trust architecture? Like I mentioned, control plane is not a single entity, depends on how you implement control. If you implement it in a way where it becomes a single point of attack or single point of failure, then that's a design thing. But otherwise, control plane has a set of functions. How you implement those functions using different technologies that matter. And then it's always possible to secure your control plane elements as well. Uh, then how are organizations getting towards zero trust model, and what are the real world challenges? I think Chish, you had a separate slide on that, so I'll not
Yeah.
touch that now. And is zero trust combining isolated activities which are generally practiced or has much more to offer? Okay, zero trust. We spoke about various aspects of zero trust, but an important thing there is there are a set of technologies that are also necessary to implement zero trust, and what level of zero trust you want to implement. All of that is dependent on what do you design, how do you implement, and what are the technologies that you use. So zero trust, is it something that I've always been practicing? No, it's a paradigm shift. We said the main paradigm shift was what did you trust and what did you not trust before. That has changed. That's the only thing I would say. I do not know much about zero knowledge proof. So Shesh, if you want to pick that, but we'll pick that later. Uh, any source that you can start to learn zero trust, you can look at the Forrester model, you can look at the NIST model, and of course there are lots of content about zero trust. I haven't seen a specific certification for zero trust. The existing certifications might cover it or not. Especially, I think the CISSP recently upgraded their certification to 601. I don't know whether that covers zero trust.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is a specific certification for zero trust, but it's given that it's a combination number of technologies and approaches, right? I think CISSP kind of thing covers different domains, like the network and then network segmentation, micro segmentation, and stuff like that. It also covers things like endpoint security. So it's covered in different areas, but bringing it all together, I probably believe CISSP would start looking at this for probably their next releases and so on, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but at the moment, no. Yeah.
And can zero trust be scaled to the cloud? Absolutely, yes. Does Stealth have cloud capabilities? It does. And as you know more about Stealth, you'll easily find about the cloud capabilities as well. Uh, do cloud service providers have their own zero trust methodologies? They could have different technologies to different extents. So Stealth is enabled for the cloud. What is the process for applying for a cybersecurity job at Unisys Stealth? Interesting question. We have a contest going on called Cloud 2020. It's probably the largest technology student technical project contest that we've created. It's in year 11. So the winners of Cloud 2020, you can Google for that. Winners of Cloud 2020 usually have a large cash prize as well as there's a lot of visibility, and the top few winners even get job offers at Unisys. That's a perfect way to join Unisys and Stealth. Uh, what if multiple ports are being scanned? I think this was in the context of dynamic isolation that Shesh was talking about. Um, can we also do hands-on in next stealth session? I think on the stealth website, Unisys stealth website, there is a place where I remember seeing where you can actually request for a sandbox where you can try out. But in the next session, we're going to show you how stealth works. It's a fairly detailed product. It does a lot of things. I did not cover all of that when I was talking. Now, since this is a zero trust presentation, when we show stealth next week, we'll show you how easily it helps you define microsegments, how does it help you implement microsegments, cloaking, and all of that, including dynamic isolation. So is it an on-prem service or SOC service? It is Stealth is a product, and it's also very closely tied to the services that Unisys offers. So Sesh, I can say yes for both of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And uh,
Yeah,
I think
I know we have just reached the end of the hour, so we can also take some of these which have not been answered. We will take it, and as we recap in the next session, we can also cover some of these questions. Is that fine?
yes, I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I think we have had a decent coverage. Hopefully, you all, got your responses. At least some of you have got for the questions. But I mean, we will since we have a two-part, we can also take it and see how we can cover it in the next session.
We'll also have a recap next week. That's going to be a short recap, but you'll see, and it's a zero trust. There are so many things. It'll be easier for us to show and tell, which is what some of our colleagues would also join us and do next week. So we look forward to that, and maybe it's time to hand it back to Shikha.
Thank you, Shesh and Srivatsa. It was a wonderful session today. Shika has left. It was a wonderful session. I think we will have the next session on 9th of December. And there is a good feedback over here by the participant. For the participant, we'll be posting the assessment link. We'll have 1 hour to answer those questions.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Is it okay if Shri and I?
Yes, Shesh, I think we can leave. Thanks a lot for taking the session today.
Thank you, Shikha. It was great.
Thanks, Sheikh. Thanks, Sri. It is a very good session. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Karthik. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We look forward to the next one. Thanks.
Bye-bye.